For today's seminar, we are fortunate to have Professor Rick Mumford, who is our Deputy Chief Scientific Advisor and Head of Science, Evidence and Research Division. And joining Rick, we have Michelle Patel, who is Deputy Director of Science, Evidence and Research Division. Here at the FSA, we have recently refreshed our Areas of Research Interest, or ARIs, and Rick and Michelle are here today to officially launch these and detail what these are and what they mean for you. So from all of us here at the Food for Thought team, we hope you enjoy today's session, and I will now pass you over to Rick and Michelle to begin their presentation.
Thank you, Victoria. Yes, so as Victoria said, my name is Rick Mumford. I'm Deputy CSA at the Food Standards Agency and Deputy Director of Science, Evidence and Research. And we'd just like to take this opportunity to spend a bit of time talking you through the areas of research interest that we've recently published, explaining why they're important and how they align to things like our strategy. We're going to do a double act, and so I'll hand you over to Michelle, who's going to lead you into the slides, and then we'll sort of keep flip-flopping between the two of us as we go through, and then we'll pick up any questions and answers at the end. Okay, thanks. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Rick. So hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Patel. I am the Deputy Director of Analysis and Insight, which is part of the Science, Evidence and Research Directorate at the FSA. Analysis and Insight covers operational research, statistics, social science, economics and foresight. And Rick's going to tell you a bit more about how the Directorate is set up in a minute. But I just wanted to start off by talking about the FSA and our strategy. So we recently published a new strategy earlier this year. Our mission, the reason we're here, is to make sure that we have food we can trust. And that's not changed. We want to make sure that food is safe and what it says it is. And we also want to make sure we play our part in the wider agenda around food being healthy and sustainable, as well as safe and authentic. So if you're really interested in what we do as an organisation and where we're going as an organisation, that document is very important. It sets out some really key things. So the first thing is it sets out our guiding principles as an organisation. So the way that we're going to do everything that we do. And you'll see there that one of those, top right in our guiding principles, is that we are science and evidence led. And that means that whatever we do, whatever decisions we make, they need to be based on good data, robust science, good evidence. And that's what we in CERD do. We provide that evidence so that the decisions that are made in the FSA, but also increasingly out in the wider food policy world, have got a better grounding in science than they would have without us. And this shines through in the various key roles that we take as an organisation. And this again is in the strategy document. So we're an evidence generator. I mean, that should be self-evident as to how science and evidence feeds into that. But unusually for government department, we publish absolutely everything that we do. We publish all of our work. It's right there in our founding DNA is a commitment to openness, which allows us not just to provide and be transparent about the evidence upon which we make our own decisions, but to add that evidence to the sum of human knowledge. And more we're contributing strong science to new areas that are benefiting the wider community. As an organisation, we're a policymaker, we're a regulator. We make the call on what you can and can't have in this country. And after Brexit, we really do make the call, because it used to be done at EFSA, now it's done here. And the science and evidence that we produce provides the basis of those policy and regulatory decisions. We're a watchdog. So right up in the top bit of our founding act back in 2001, it says that we are here to look out for the consumer interest in the food system. And that doesn't mean just calling it out when there's something wrong in the food, although of course we will always do that. It means making sure that we are taking the consumer perspective and the consumer interest into account, and calling out when there's something happening in the food system that isn't right. And that's a unique role, actually, because in government, food policy is so very dispersed. Having one place where it comes together in a complex system, one organisation that looks out for the consumer, is actually quite unusual. Most of the food regulators don't always have that role. But it is a complex system, and there are lots and lots of people working in food policy. So our other role is a convener and a collaborator. We're really, really small. but we can work with and through loads and loads of others to tackle some of the big questions, the big problems that are bigger than we could alone. So hopefully over the next kind of 30-ish minutes, you'll get an idea of what we're doing and how we're working with others and how we're working on really interesting science and research ourselves. The idea of our areas of research interest is to help others understand what it is we're interested in working on, and maybe we can work together. Over to Rick.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think before we sort of move on to talking about the ARIs, it might be worth just sort of reminding everyone, especially anyone who's external to the FSA, about our science and evidence capabilities and how we deliver that. And I think this is a very sort of simple summary of how that's done. So if you start at the top, at 12 o'clock, we have CERT, so that's the Science Evidence and Research Directorate, and that's 150 plus multidisciplinary scientists and analysts. So again, it covers off the area that Michelle described earlier, so economics, operational research, social research, stats, etc., but also covers off risk assessment and a range of other sort of more generalist science roles as well, looking after things like laboratories and science governance. Moving clockwise, we also then of course have our chief scientific advisor, Robin May, and the Science Council, and they provide a strategic advisory and assurance function. Of course, we work very independently as well, and work with others, and the Science Advisory Committee is absolutely critical to that. We have over 100 experts across 8 different committees and expert groups, and these are absolutely critical part of our risk analysis process. Likewise, the National Reference Laboratories, they cover a whole range of specialist functions, and they provide invaluable information about development of new methods and how those methods are applied, and really support our national testing capability. We also then have access to other experts as well, over 300 specialists, deep specialists, who have very specific niche skills. And we access those through the register of specialists, and that's how we can access things for, say, peer review of reports, or for very specialist pieces of consultancy work. But then finally, and last but not least, and in the context of this talk, most important, the research and evidence programs that we run. We have over 100 different projects and a budget of 9 to 10 million that we spend externally, and that's where the ARIs play in. Next slide, please, Michelle. So how do we actually deliver that? So that's a description of our science system, if you like. But we actually, what are the functions that we have within Science Evidence and Research Directorate? Well, as I've alluded to at the top, is risk analysis. That's probably the biggest bit. About 50+% of the whole of the directorate is focused on risk analysis and providing expert risk assessment. But it also includes other things like other legitimate factors. We also then have a role where we provide expert analysis across the FSA, so in particular supporting our transformation programs. And again, that's something that Michelle's team very much feeds into. We've talked about, again, moving to the bottom, I'm skipping over one, we just moved to science assurance and governance, and again this is looking after the science advisory committees, but also making sure that we are a government department and we comply with the other sort of initiatives that come out of the government chief scientist's office, and how we sort of comply with those, and how we play our part as part of the national science system. And moving around, surveillance and national capabilities, again, national reference laboratories, sampling, looking after official control labs. And then just moving around to around 10 o'clock, we have the PathSafe programme, which is a 3-year programme, £19 million that we lead on behalf of Treasury, which is looking at new surveillance methods. But the one that I want to skip over, that I skipped over, that I think again is really pertinent, is this piece about research and evidence programmes. And these, as I said before, this is how we deliver our external research and evidence projects with our external contractors across academia and the institutes. And this is where our areas of research interest come to play. Next slide, please. So what exactly are ARI, or areas of research interest? Well, these are a set of research questions, and why we have them is so we can go out there to the world and say, these are the areas that we want to address, to promote when we're trying to protect public health and ensuring consumers are well informed and have access to safe food, we need to understand a lot of research questions and get access to those. And these are what we've been working on, and this is what we've recently published. And again, this point about them aligning through to the new set and how they align to the new FSA strategy. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that all government departments should have a set of ARI. There should be, it's part of the Science Capability Review that was published in 2019. That recommendation was made. We did in fact have a set back in early set back in 2017, but we republished them in 2020, and then a new set, as we said, have come out recently. Next slide, please. So what do we do with them? Why do we bother having them? Well, I think they sort of flag what we want to do with our research going forward, the areas, the gaps that we have in our knowledge, the areas that we're interested in, and how we can engage. So that point about building and extending our collaborations, how do external academics, etc., other funders, other government departments know what we're interested in, so they can come and talk to us and we can talk to them. That's true as well with the research community. There are others out there who are already doing areas of working on specific research projects, and how can we actually go and talk to them? How can we understand what they're already doing so they can work out what we're interested in? They help us to enhance a more robust evidence base. So again, what is already going on in the world out there, and how can we get access to that? If we put out a flag saying these are our interests, then it allows us to start those conversations and be able to sort of engage more widely. It helps us also contribute to the prioritization exercise. So if we have people that work with us, that partner with us, how do they, and they might have lots of great ideas for how they want to improve the food system, how they think about food safety, but actually can really help them sort of get their thinking straight around what the priorities of the FSA are as a government department. And of course, it can also help in that final way of how we can develop joint initiatives with other funders. We've worked very hard over the years to sort of build good strategic partnerships with UKRI and in particular the likes of BBSRC. But actually part of that is then them understanding what our priorities are, so we can sort of look for the synergies with their priorities and we will work together. So basically the ARI have a whole range of different functions and purposes. Next slide, please. So as I was alluding to earlier, we did publish a first set back in 2017 and then a revised set in 2020. But actually, the most recent ones have come out actually only a few weeks ago, in fact. And these are designed to update us on where we are, in particular, to align with the FSA strategy that's been published in the spring. And as you know, Michelle talked us through that, and I think it's really critical that actually science isn't seen as something separate. It's how does science help deliver that strategy, and that's where the ARIs come in. So again, what we've looked at is the sort of issues surrounding food are very broad, and as a result, we've had to revisit those sort of research questions that we wish to address and try and see if we can expand to cover not only, I suppose, what is core to what we do in terms of, and always has been core to what we do in terms of food is safe and food is what it says it is, but also looking at this sort of newer sort of third pillar, which is around food is healthier and more sustainable. Next slide, please.
I think this is over to me.
I think it is, Michelle.
Yeah. So there are 4 big headings that we have. As I say, it's a very broad picture that we're looking at now. The food system it touches everything and everyone. And we group our research questions under 4 headings. So the first is our kind of core, as Rick just said, food safety and standards. No one else does that. That's what we do. We work with local authorities and we work directly with food businesses, and we are the authority on what is safe and authentic when it comes to food. The second one is that other bit in our remit that I alluded to, which is about the consumer interest. So this is about understanding consumers, our responsibility to consumers, and how consumers experience the food system and the impact that system has on society. The third is about being ready in a changing world, The food system is changing rapidly, and so this is about how can we be ready to regulate the system of the future as well as the current system. And then the fourth is about really playing our role in looking at those massive global challenges that we're all looking at when it comes to food and the food system, and giving our contribution to these big challenges that we can't solve on our own. So back to Rick, I think, to talk about the first one.
Sorry, laggy mute button. Research priority area 1 is assurance food and feed safety and standards. And as Michelle said, this is absolutely core to what we do. And here is a list of the sort of high level questions. There's the more detailed questions that sit underneath these, but you can see the sort of range of things we're looking at, you know, in terms of what is the impact of chemical hazards, what are the impact of foodborne pathogens, you know, looking at things like food hypersensitivity and the impact of those on consumers. But we also need to understand more in this space around the sort of challenges presented by the system. So again, the impact of crime, you know, global systems. We live in a global food system, and how does that impact on us and the potential for changes in food standards, but also looking at things like the novel foods and the non-traditional foods. And just to give an example of the sorts of things that we would do under this area, some of the projects that we're currently delivering on, if you think about something like foodborne pathogens, a major project that we're currently dealing with, which would sit under that question that's trying to address some of those questions, is IID3, where we're trying to look at the improving our estimates of foodborne disease, which pathogens are involved in causing foodborne illness, and trying to improve those estimates by getting more detailed information from working with GPs and others to try and understand which pathogens are important, how much foodborne disease is actually caused, and where we can then prioritise and how we can mitigate against that risk. Same when you go to something like the impact of crime. We've got a piece of work going on at the moment which is looking at the cost of food crime and trying to understand the impact of that. And again, these sorts of things around, you know, cost of illness models, etc., are really critical to our work, because they really help us to understand what the size of the challenge is and where we should prioritise. And then when you move to the bottom, thinking about some of the things we do around impact and risk of novel foods and non-traditional foods, we've got portfolios of work in here that include things such as looking at alternative protein. And for example, we've just started a project, just as a case study, just an example of this, that's looking at feed streams that waste feed streams that are going into insect protein production, and what are the risks and hazards and risks associated with those, and can we understand more about them. So this gives you a sort of flavour of the sorts of things that we're covering under this high level theme of food safety and standards. And at that point, I'll hand over to Michelle to cover the next two areas of priority.
Thank you. So the second one is about understanding consumers and our wider society, and quite a lot of the work that goes into this stream comes from my team, because we have the social scientists, the economists, the operational researchers and the statisticians. So we look at how consumers experience the food system, and that might be, for example, providing evidence on consumer views, opinions, behaviours, attitudes towards some of the new technologies that Rick was just mentioning. It can mean understanding people's levels of awareness or their risk perceptions, but it can also be measuring those societal changes that are changing how consumers act in the food system. And one example I'd give there would be the fact that we've been publishing statistics on food poverty since 2016, but when COVID struck in early 2020, we ramped up the frequency of doing that, because it was very clear that some consumers were changing their behaviour quite rapidly in response to what was going on around them, not just the supply issues and the transport issues and the difficulties that were coming with lockdown, but also the financial and economic shock of that. And we saw, and still continue to see, risk there, not just in terms of people's behaviours, but of course in their wider welfare and their access to healthy, sustainable food. So we continue to publish those statistics. We have another package coming out very soon. So if you're interested in that, it's quite a rich data set now. And we've looked at that through various methods. And we do use various methods to understand consumers. So we don't just use surveys, although we have a flagship survey called Food and You Too. But we are increasingly using observed methodologies. We're using randomized control trials, as well as looking at the why, as well as the how many through qualitative and deliberative methods. When it comes to priority 3, this is about the future, and we tend to look to a 5-10 year horizon to understand what are the big socio-political, economic, technological factors that are driving change in the food system. What then does that mean in terms of increased risks or opportunities? And then what then does it mean for us as a regulator, as a policymaker, and in our other roles? So we every year, every 2 years, but we're doing it this year, we look out at a relatively medium-term horizon. I know there are other organisations that look at a 50-year horizon. We look at a 5 to 10 year horizon, and we assess, working with over, I think last time it was over 200 experts, what are the big shifts that are coming, and then we look at what our evidence gaps are, and then we go out and we fill those evidence gaps so that we know what's coming and we can make a good stab at it. And we do this out to as far as we usefully can. So the last time we did this, we identified some big gaps in our evidence base around emerging technologies, which we've been filling. You may have seen, if you've been following our publications, that we have published reports, firstly mapping the proximity and the potential impact of new and emerging technologies on the food system, and then digging down into alternative proteins and into new and potentially digital ways of buying, selling and sharing food. And now we're looking at the impact of plastic alternatives, and we're looking at personalised nutrition, but we're also stepping back and we're taking that big look again at what the shifts and disruptions might be for the period looking out to 2032, which sounds like an awfully long way off, but it isn't if you think about how long it takes to develop regulatory frameworks for some of these things, which are really not like the ways of producing and storing and transporting and selling and accessing food that we've had in the past. So not only into this do we put our scan of the horizon, but we also have ways of developing new and innovative methods that will make us a more innovative and effective regulator. So whether that is using digital advances in technology to be able to do better surveillance, or indeed track, for example, foodborne pathogens in a way that we just haven't been able to do before. And I will pass back to Rick for the last one.
Thank you. So I think if you think about the 4 sort of research priorities, there's kind of one way to look at it. Is the first one is really sort of core and essential to sort of our role as a regulator and responsible for food safety and food standards. If you then look at the 2 research priorities that Michelle's talked about, it's very much taking a food system type approach, but looking at it maybe through different lenses, through the perspective from a consumer, but then also with 3 from the perspective of maybe the future and new technologies and new innovation. This 4th one is also focused very much on thinking about the food system, but it's also how the different lens that we do here is almost the grand challenges. Now we know that the food system doesn't sit in isolation of these things, and the sort of things like climate change, the things like antimicrobial resistance, the things like shifting diets, plastic pollution, all these kind of things aren't are things that affect everyone, affect the global system, but they do of course impact on the food system, and we need to understand both what those impacts are, but also what are maybe the unintended consequences of trying to mitigate against those. And these are sort of 3 areas that we are very concerned about. At the top, we talk about antimicrobial resistance. The FSA is part of that large cross-government consortium that is feeding into the UK AMR National Action Plan. We are responsible for the food chain component of that National Action Plan. So we have an ongoing programme of work that looks at how AMR spreads through the food chain, how it might be mitigated, what the size of the risks are, and understanding other aspects like how much do consumers and food businesses understand from that. So again, that's a global challenge, and us playing our part in that, and the evidence we're looking for to deal with that. Again, with climate change, it impacts on everyone. It massively impacts on the food system. The food system is actually a major part of probably driving climate change as well. So as people start to change, move towards things like net zero, what are the consequences of that, possibly unintended consequences? An example of that is work that our Science Council is currently doing on what is Working Group 6, looking at net zero, climate change, and possible impacts on food safety. So as we change agricultural production systems, will there be implications for the food system and food safety and food standards? And then, of course, the other thing about diets, and again, these things aren't in isolation. A lot of diet change is being driven by the need for to mitigate climate change. And what will we be seeing there as people move to more healthy and sustainable diets? Will there be changes? And again, we need to understand those, because what are potentially the impacts on food safety and food standards and food security? So again, that sort of summarises the fourth area that we're interested in. Next slide, please. So I guess as we look to sort of wrap up, just a couple of slides now before we go into the question and answer session. But I guess the questions might be, that's all very nice, Rick and Michelle, but what does it actually mean for me as a member of the participating in the audience today? Well, I think one of the things here is a message here to our colleagues and other policy professionals about, you know, when we're thinking about research, is how we can work more closely together to make sure that we're developing the right evidence to support policy making and asking the right questions. So again, it's about this kind of science policy partnership that needs to be developed, and actually the ARIs of part of that research and evidence cycle. We see it's a starting point. So again, how can we get that joined up, and how can we use the ARIs as part of our internal process? For example, the research and evidence program steering groups. How can we get those working more effectively? Again, can we make sure that we're getting the most robust evidence and accessing all the evidence that is out there? If we're putting a flag out there through our ARI, how do we then does that allow other people to come in and say, actually, we've got decent evidence, for example, and we can support that? So it helps us find the best evidence that's out there. This communication of departmental research interests is really important. As I said, all government departments should have their ARIs, and there is a piece of work happening centrally in Go Science to try and see if there's cross links, so we can actually join together. So if everyone's got their sets and they're interested in, say, we're interested in consumers for food purposes, and someone else is interested in consumers for educational purposes, then you know, maybe we can join those pieces up and do more sort of collaborative work and look for synergies on the evidence that we're all spending money to generate. I think it also helps us understand our strategic priorities and helps us sort of drive that forward. So that's another really important area, because it by us stating our priorities, it then helps us have those conversations about where we need to be putting effort. And of course, it really does strengthen engagement with researchers. You know, if you're an academic with an interest in the food system, you probably do wonder, you know, what is the Food Standards Agency interested in? And this is our sort of, if you like, a brochure of our research interests that you can go and access and hopefully start a conversation with us, or if you're already working with us, work more closely with us. And actually, to that final point, it does also then help us explain access a wider range of suppliers. So again, hopefully there are people out there who haven't traditionally worked in this area, haven't traditionally worked with the FSA, but by looking at the ARI, they can get a better sense of what we're interested in and could maybe spark an idea of some work that they might already be doing that they could work with us on. So it's a very good calling card and advertisement for our science, if you like. Final slide. please. And I suppose that message is very simple. Yeah, please come and talk to us. We're very open to any feedback, any ideas. The ARI are out there to try and help us start conversations. And if you want to access variety of routes, the ARI published on FoodGov website. We have an email address there, generic email address that the team will pick up. But also then sign up to the science newsletter. And again, we talk about the ARI, our areas of research interest, our research and evidence programs, etc., and new things that are coming out. So again, there's a whole range of ways that people can engage with us, or just drop if you really want, and you know me, drop me or Michelle an email. We'll pick it up so we can signpost people through to the right people in the team.